I never believed in haunted objects. Ghost stories were fun to read, urban legends were exciting to share on camping nights, but deep down I always told myself there had to be a logical explanation for everything. At least, that was true until I came across the trunk. It was a heavy, iron-banded trunk with peeling green paint. The kind you'd expect to see in some old ship captain's cabin. I found it not in a museum or a marketplace, but in my late uncle's attic after he passed away. He had been a quiet man, a history professor who lived alone, and his house was more like a time capsule than a home. Dusty books lined the shelves, framed maps curled on the walls, and in the corner of the attic, beneath a thick tarp, was the trunk. The strange thing was, it wasn't listed in the inventory of his belongings, and no one in my family remembered ever seeing it before. Even stranger, when I tugged at the rusty lock, it snapped open with almost no effort, as if it wanted me to look inside. Inside were items that didn't make sense together. A child's worn leather shoe, cracked and brittle with age. A set of keys tied with a red ribbon. A photograph of a school, faded and creased. And at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small bell. I almost laughed when I saw it. A bell? Not some ancient artifact, not some rare treasure. Just an ordinary brass handbell like the kind teachers used decades ago to call students in from recess. But when I lifted it out, I swear the attic went colder. My breath came out in a thin mist. Even though it was the middle of summer, I shook it once, expecting a faint, cheerful ring. Instead, the sound that came out was dull, almost choked, like it was ringing underwater. And then, I heard something impossible: children laughing. Not the joyful laughter you'd hear in a playground, but soft, distant giggles that carried a strange echo, as though they were drifting through a tunnel. I froze, staring at the bell, and that's when I noticed the photograph again. The school in the picture had a name carved above the entrance: Fairmont Elementary. My uncle had lived nowhere near that place, and yet there it was, tucked into his secret trunk, along with a bell that seemed to carry voices. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online for Fairmont Elementary. At first, nothing came up. Then, buried in an archive site, I found a newspaper clipping from the 1960s. The headline read, "Tragic fire at Fairmont Elementary leaves 23 children dead," and the picture matched the one in my hand. I stared at the article, the bell sitting on my desk beside me, and as I read the words of the tragedy, how the fire had spread too quickly, how no one had made it out of the basement classroom, I heard something else. A faint, metallic rattle. The bell had rung, but I hadn't touched it. I pushed my chair back, my heart pounding. The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels thick, pressing against your ears. I tried to tell myself it was a draft, vibrations from the house settling, but the truth was undeniable. The bell was facing me, upright, still vibrating slightly. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear faint whispers, like children reciting lessons in unison, fading in and out. By morning, I had convinced myself that I was imagining it all. Lack of sleep, grief over my uncle's death, it was making me hallucinate. But then I saw the shoe. I had left everything else in the trunk, but the shoe was sitting on my kitchen counter. No one else had a key to the house. My front door was locked, and the shoe, it smelled faintly of smoke. That was when I decided I had to know more. I drove 3 hours to the town where Fairmont Elementary had once stood. The school was long gone, demolished after the fire, replaced by a municipal building. But at the local library, the records were still there. Old photographs, yellowed newspaper articles, and a thin folder labeled Unsolved Reports. What I found chilled me. Several witnesses had reported hearing bells the night of the fire. Not alarm bells, but a handbell, ringing steadily, even as the smoke filled the halls. Survivors, few as they were claimed, the sound came from the basement, where the children were trapped. Firefighters swore they heard it too, long after the flames had died down. And here I was, decades later, holding that very same bell. As I left the library, an older woman approached me. She had been sitting quietly in the corner while I read, her eyes following me. She wore a faded gray coat, her hair white and thin, but her gaze was sharp. "You've found it, haven't you?" she asked. I froze. "Found what?" "The bell." I swallowed hard, trying to play dumb, but she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Don't ring it again. Do you understand me? Once is enough. That's how they know you now." "Who?" I asked. Her expression darkened. "The children. The ones who never left." Before I could ask more, she walked away, disappearing into the stacks. I searched for her later, asked the librarian if she knew who the woman was, but no one had seen her come in. That night, I couldn't help myself. I took the bell into my hands again, staring at its tarnished surface. My reflection warped in the brass, my face stretched and bent, almost unrecognizable. Against every instinct, I rang it. This time, the sound was sharper, louder. The air seemed to shift around me, and for a split second, I swore I saw them small shapes in the corner of the room, standing close together. Their faces were pale, eyes wide, clothing singed with soot. And then, in unison, they whispered a word that made my blood run cold. "Teacher." The room went black. When I came to, the bell was on the floor beside me, and the photograph of the school was gone. When I woke up on the floor that night, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the ordinary kind, but an oppressive, suffocating quiet that made me feel like my ears were stuffed with cotton. The bell lay beside me, cold to the touch, as though it had been sitting outside in the snow. My phone screen showed it was 3:17 a.m., but I had no memory of the hours passing. The photograph of the school was gone, but in its place was something else scratched into the wooden surface of my desk. Were 3 crooked words. "Come to class." I stumbled back, my chest tight, trying to convince myself I had done it in some kind of sleepwalking state. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. The letters were jagged, carved deep, and the wood chips still lay scattered across the floor as if they'd been freshly made. For the next several days, I tried everything to rid myself of the bell. I wrapped it in cloth and shoved it back into the trunk. I locked the trunk and shoved it behind boxes in the attic. I even considered throwing it into the river. But each time I thought about it, I felt an inexplicable dread, as though doing so would be a terrible mistake. And the bell didn't stay hidden. Each morning, I'd find it in a different place on my nightstand, on the kitchen counter, once even resting on my pillow, inches from my face. The sound of faint laughter began following me wherever I went. At first, I'd hear it only at night, but soon it bled into the daytime, echoing in empty hallways at work, or muffled beneath the hum of my car engine. I told myself it was stress, but there's only so long you can lie to in yourself before reality forces you to face the truth. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps, tiny, quick, and numerous, scurrying across the hardwood floor of my bedroom. My eyes shot open, and in the glow of the moonlight streaming through the curtains, I saw them. Dozens of small, shadowy figures huddled at the foot of my bed. Their outlines flickered, as if caught between 2 worlds. But their eyes were bright and unblinking. "Teacher," they whispered again, voices overlapping like a chorus. "Come to class." I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. My body wouldn't move. The paralysis was total. The children crept closer, their hands reaching toward me, their faces pale and burned. Just as their fingertips brushed the blanket, the bell rang sharply on its own, the sound splitting the silence like glass shattering, and they were gone. The next morning, desperate for answers, I drove back to the town where Fairmont Elementary had stood. I needed to know why the bell had chosen me, what it wanted. I found an old man at the diner who still remembered the fire. His name was Carl, a retired janitor who had been working at the school when it burned down. He told me something the newspapers never mentioned. There was a teacher in the basement that night, he said. his eyes heavy with memory. Miss Halloway. She taught the youngest kids. When the fire spread, she rang her handbell to keep them calm, told them it was a game, that they had to stay seated. My stomach sank. The bell, I said. Carl nodded slowly. If you've got it, son, you'd better get rid of it. That bell doesn't belong in this world anymore. But when I told him I couldn't, when I confessed that it kept coming back, he went pale, his fork clattering against the plate. Then they've marked you. You're their teacher now. I drove home shaking, every mile heavier than the last. The words echoed in my mind. You're their teacher now. That night, I dreamed of the school. It wasn't a dream like any I'd ever had. It was too real. I was standing in a smoke-filled hallway, the walls blackened with soot, children seated in neat rows along the floor, their faces smeared with ash. At the front of the room stood Miss Halloway. She wasn't burned, not exactly, but her skin seemed wrong, as if it had been peeled back and rearranged. She looked at me and smiled, her teeth gray and jagged. You came, she said. Her voice was sweet, almost kind, but it dripped with something rotten beneath the surface. They've been waiting for you. The children all turned their heads at once, their hollow eyes fixed on me. And then, in unison, they began to chant. Ring the bell! Ring the bell! Ring the bell! I woke gasping, the taste of smoke in my mouth. The bell was in my hand. From that night on, my house stopped, feeling like my own. Doors creaked open by themselves. Cold drafts swept through the rooms, carrying faint chalk dust and the smell of burnt wood. Sometimes, I'd hear the faint scratch of chalk on a board, though my walls were bare, and then the writing began. On my bathroom mirror, class is in session. On the wall above my bed, don't be late. Even on the inside of my closet door, scrawled in childlike handwriting, bring us home. The bell rang constantly now, sometimes just a dull rattle, sometimes sharp and piercing. And every time it rang, I caught glimpses, small shoes peeking out from under the couch, soot-stained fingers curling around the door frame, pale faces staring from the corners of dark rooms. It was no longer just haunting me, it was preparing me. The voices grew stronger, no longer whispers but insistent demands. They called me teacher, more and more, their tone shifting from pleading to commanding. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. They didn't want to haunt me. They wanted me with them. I don't remember exactly when I stopped fighting it. Maybe it was after the mirror words appeared. Or maybe it was the night I woke to find rows of tiny desks filling my living room, real desks, wood cracked and scorched, each one occupied by an ash-faced child staring at me in silence. I didn't buy them. I didn't drag them in. But they were there. And the bell was waiting on my table, as if I was supposed to begin. The line between waking and dreaming collapsed. Whether my eyes were open or shut, I was in their classroom. The air always thick with smoke. The floorboards groaning under phantom footsteps. And at the center of it all, Miss Halloway, her presence stronger now, less of a vision and more of a guide. You don't have to be afraid, she told me one night, her voice like a lullaby distorted on an old record. You just have to teach. That's all they ever wanted, someone who won't abandon them. But the way her eyes gleamed when she said it told me she wasn't giving me a choice. The final breaking point came 3 nights later. The children didn't wait for me to dream. They came in the middle of the day. I was sitting at my kitchen table, coffee untouched, when the air thickened with smoke. My ears filled with the sound of the fire alarm, shrill, endless, and then the laughter began. Not faint this time, but loud, filling every room. When I looked up, the walls of my kitchen were gone. Charred plaster replaced them. My ceiling blackened. Flames licked at the corners but never consumed. I was standing inside Fairmont Elementary, as it had been in its last terrible moments, and every child was there, waiting. They were silent now, seated neatly at their desks, their dark eyes unblinking. Miss Halloway stood at the front of the room, her face pale and warped, her hands clasped around the bell. She rang it once, the sound slicing through the smoke. Then she held it out to me. "You're their teacher now," she said. I tried to speak, to refuse, to run, but my body moved on its own. My hand reached out, fingers curling around the cold metal. The bell was heavy, impossibly heavy, and yet it felt like it belonged to me. The children straightened in their seats, eyes fixed on me, waiting, and without meaning to, without even wanting to, I rang it. The sound was deafening. It vibrated through my bones, rattling my teeth, splitting my thoughts in half. The fire roared higher, but the children smiled for the first time, 100 blackened teeth gleaming in the dark. "Good," Miss Holloway whispered. "Class has begun." That's when I understood. They didn't want release. They didn't want peace. They wanted ritual, continuation, an eternal lesson in the ruins of a school that never let them go. And I was trapped in it. I don't know how long it's been since that moment. Days, weeks. Time here doesn't follow the rules I used to know. Sometimes I wake in my bed, the bell on my nightstand, thinking maybe it was all a dream. But then I hear them, the soft scurry of footsteps in the hall, the giggle of a child just out of sight, the faint scratch of chalk against a board that isn't there. Other times I open my eyes and I'm back in the classroom, the children waiting silently for me to begin. They watch me with an intensity that makes my skin crawl. They don't blink. They don't breathe. And yet, they expect me to lead them, to keep ringing the bell, to keep the lesson going forever. I've tried to resist. I've tried not to ring it. But every time I hold back, the fire grows hotter, the walls close in, the children scream until my ears bleed. And in the end, I always give in. I always ring the bell. Because if I don't, I know they'll take me fully into the flames, and I'll never wake again. I'm writing this now in the hope someone reads it, that maybe someone will understand what happened to me. But if you're holding the bell, if you ever come across it, please, for the love of God, don't ring it, don't touch it, don't even look at it too long. Because once it finds you, it never lets go. And sooner or later, you'll hear them too.